Welcome to Inside Startup Investing, the only podcast where you can invest in every guest. On this episode, I will be speaking with the CEO of Fragment Media, Nicholas White. In the heyday of journalism, the biggest buildings in the biggest cities were owned by the newspaper companies. The biggest names worked in journalism on the biggest stories, and readers all across the country and world paid to get that news at their doorstep every day. Of course, by now, we all know the world has evolved dramatically. Some might argue a bit too far from the days of hard-hitting, fact-based journalism across all spectrums of news, from business to science to politics and beyond. But while we live in a clicks-driven world filled with clickbait news that's more bark than bite, there is still a large swath of the population that I would argue is looking for great sources of information above all else. Enter Fragment Media, a business born from a man who comes from multiple generations of journalists wanting to see that the importance of good journalism doesn't die. Even in this age where people say journalism is a dying business, Nicholas and his team have created a set of digital-first, deep dive, research-first sources of information and news in sectors like science, internet culture, and climate that have generated over $40 million in sales in the past 4 years, with over $11 million in annual sales. For a dying business, I'm impressed. Though as I dove deeper with Nicholas, it became more clear why it's working. The team starts with the product in mind, creating amazing stories and news backed by best-in-class journalists. They live and breathe the product, and in doing so, have created something people are willing to pay for, even with all the free noise that is out there on the internet. With 20,000 plus paying readers and a long way to go in growing that base of paid subscribers, it seems as though Fragment Media has cracked the code on how to build a growing, sustainable news-first organization here in 2026. By diving deep on niche publications with focused audiences, Fragment is finding ways to create deep value for those seeking out news specific to their interests. In today's vast web and AI answer engines world, I think this is a brilliant way to win and retain paid readers. I love to see it. So with that, let's get on to the show and hear how Nicholas and his team are winning in a dying industry. So Nick, for those who don't know, tell us in one line, what is Fragment Media?
Fragment Media is a digital media company. We hope to take advantage of a trend that we see in the digital media business, where people are becoming more and more willing to pay for quality content directly. And so we are hoping to build a portfolio of media titles that are each so good and so trusted by our readers that they think that they're worth paying for. And we're starting with our flagship publication, a science magazine called Nautilus.
What does Nautilus, what do readers get in it? Why is it really good and worth paying for?
So we like to think it's the only science magazine that matters. We have been told that by some of our readers. Obviously one person says it, and that's the kind of thing you glom onto immediately. And I think where Nautilus is unique is, we cover science, but we cover science in a way that I like to think of it as the magic of science. We're not just looking at the individual. Of course we have wonderful journalists with deep backgrounds in science. And so they're not just reporting unproblematically the latest headline. First and foremost, they're able to really assess and understand the methodology behind any study, the context in which that study is appearing, so that you're not just getting sort of these one little headline here and there. One study says carbs are good for you, the next study says carbs are bad for you. 1 minute we know what antimatter is, and the next minute we don't know what antimatter is. But it's also trying to answer sort of the really big questions. And zoom out from just the latest study and say, where is the cutting edge of science? How do we understand the universe, ourselves, quanta, whatever it is, right? What is the cutting edge of our current understanding, and what does that mean for sort of humanity as a whole?
From a readership perspective, what do your clients look like, and what's the size of that opportunity look like?
So we Our particular audience is sort of what you would expect. Nautilus is our flagship. Our largest audience has a really high. The most remarkable thing about them, the way they're most different from the general population, is that they have a really high instance of advanced degrees. In addition, they tend to be overall well educated. They tend to be higher income. They are, kind of 30, 35 plus. Those are sort of their basic demographics. But there are also people who, sort of psychographically are curious, who are interested, who always want to learn new things, and who feel that, sort of they have the capacity to as our former president from Texas would say, tell the difference between chicken shit and chicken salad. They have sort of a confidence in their own ability to sort of make decisions and make judgments. They want to think for themselves, I guess, is maybe the best way to put it, which makes me really like them. And I think that's actually a bigger opportunity than you might think. So 10 years ago, less than 10% of Americans paid for some form of news online. Today, that is almost tripled. It's 22%. And more than 50% of people say they're willing to pay for quality content online. The question just is, are they getting the quality? Are their needs being served? Do they know where to find it?
In terms of how you've grown to date, what has been your strategy and how many readers do you have right now?
Right now, we're sitting at around 22,000 paying premium subscribers, and we have a total of, I think, 450,000 free subscribers across the company. And we reach multiples of that every month across sort of all social channels, the web, etc. Our reach is frequently well over 10 million. And our strategy really for growing it is some combination of first and foremost, start by creating content that's worth paying for, that is unique and high quality and kind of worthy. That's the first thing you have to do, and remarkably few people online seem to do that, especially in the age of AI slop. We play the internet game, so we have strong social presences. We have newsletters. All those sorts of things, and those really are the top of our funnel, which we then supplement with paid advertising across social, mostly digitally across social platforms and so on. And then ultimately, we bring people into the paid membership, which is also supplemented with in-person experiences and other sort of community features.
If I understand correctly, you've also begun acquiring some other newsletters as well. Tell us about those brands and why you're bringing them into the fold.
That's mostly our long-term plan. As we sort of establish the playbook with Nautilus, our goal is to then rinse and repeat across other publications, other titles where we see the same opportunity. And we've begun to do that in a very, very small way. Instance of that is a publication we started called 15C. It was sort of acquired when it was very, very small, and we built it up, I should say. And it is essentially sort of, think of it almost like Consumer Reports, but with the sustainability as one of the main, as an equally important goal as the performance of the product, right? So we're trying to help people figure out. There's so many products on in the world now that tout their sustainability, that tout their contribution to mitigating climate change, and so we are sort of looking at how do we help people sort of again tell the chicken chip and the chicken salad, and understand like what is really living up to that promise and what isn't, as well as sort of what can you do as an individual to make a contribution to help mitigate climate change and turn the corner. Because I think so we think of it as sort of consumer climate science. We are the largest publication in that sort of category. It's really about sort of giving people a positive path.
I think when people are looking at the investment opportunity, something that might come to mind for them, right, wrong, or otherwise, is they'll go, oh, they get into all these niches, right? And when people hear niche, they immediately think small. And so how big can this opportunity be? Help paint the picture for us of, what does this look like at scale? How does this get really big?
Absolutely. So have you ever heard of or talked on the pod about ketchup versus mustard products? And basically the idea is there's two types of products in the world. There's ketchup and there's mustard. And ketchup is everything wants to be the same thing, right? Like ketchup is ketchup. It all is, whether it's Heinz or it's Hunt's or, some specialty brand or whatever, on some level, like they're all trying to be basically the same thing. Whereas mustard is, you've got yellow mustard and English mustard, hot mustard and Dijon mustard and stone grain mustard and honey mustard and brown mustard. And I mean, every kind of mustard you could possibly think of, right? And all the time people coming out with new mustards, right? And so we think that ultimately media is like mustard, right? Nobody consumes just one, right? Everybody has some set of varied interests that's unique to them, and they have a perspective that is unique to them. And so like their perfect sort of mix is going to be a few different mustards, right? Like I don't think anybody has one mustard in their refrigerator, right? We all have a couple that we like with different things. And so I think media is sort of the same way, right? And so the way we think about it is there are, like, I can't remember what exactly it works out to be, but over 50% of the adult population, that's more than 120 million people in the United States, are willing to pay for news. And what they're going to be willing to pay for, right, is the news that they trust, the news that speaks very directly to their personal interests, that is calibrated to their taste. And so I think if you want to reach a majority of that group of people, the way you do it is by having a product mix, not by having a singular brand that you think is going to be the one size fits all, because one size really doesn't fit all in this market. And so like if you want to attack that giant market, you actually need a kind of multiplicity of products, right? Which is to say, like, that 120 million people is not one monolithic object. It is actually a whole bunch of niches that are stacked up next to each other, that overlap with each other. And so like what we're trying to solve is how do you put together sort of the portfolio of mustards that sort of mix together. This is starting to get gross. That perfectly sort of satisfy each individual's taste.
Understood. As we look out, what are some of those other mustard flavors of readers that you want to hit? Is it all kind of science related, or do you go down different avenues? And then is one of the strategies here to then be able to cross-sell amongst your publications?
One, I think that we think about the sort of two different paths to go forward in terms of building the portfolio. One is we could focus it on science, since that's where we already have a really strong foothold. And you could sort of try to dominate that one category so that you have, we don't think there's only going to be one science publication to rule them all. There's going to be multiple successful science publications. And probably even individual readers will want to read more than one. And so do you have, do you try to just sort of dominate that category? And there's a lot of good things that can come from that. You can get a lot of market leverage that way and so on. And on the other side, there's also problems with that, which is to say you're sort of leaving out all the people who aren't particularly interested in science. And you're sort of then tied to whether or not science does well or does poorly. You're also competing with yourself to a certain degree, right? So the other sort of strategy we think about is like, do you sort of try to find different niches and have one thing in each niche? Understanding that it's never quite that clean and simple, so you're going to end up with a certain amount of overlap anyway. And I'd say, like, we actually go back and forth about this quite a lot, and I don't know if this is the right answer, but I think we're prepared to be somewhat opportunistic about it. To some extent, it's like, what are the right first opportunities that come along? And that will sort of take us in one direction or another, because I think both are ways to succeed. And I do think long term, the goal is to ultimately build some kind of bundle where, we do think long term there already is to some extent, and I think it's only going to increase. There's going to be subscription fatigue. People are going to get tired of having all these different things. And so to some extent, if we can say like, here's your particular basket of mustard, you want these 3 or 4, and we can give them to you in one package, one bill, obviously some kind of discount, across the board, because we have economies of scale at that point. It's possible and economical for us to do that. And so like, I definitely think that is part of the long-term strategy, but now we're talking, fair long-term.
You have tens of thousands of paid subscribers. You're doing, well north of $10 million, over $11.5 million in revenue in 2024. When you think, 3 to 5 years out from now, where do you want to be? What do you think is achievable?
I think, our past revenue, I should say here, our past revenue is heavily, we've been going through this transition. I think this is a transition that is industry wide. And I'd like to think that we're part of the leading edge of that transition, but we all have a background in this business going back a long time. And so, our historical revenue is actually driven more by sort of mass advertising. And the transition, we're transitioning in 2025 away from mass advertising and toward beta revenue. And so that's a much smaller chunk, and that grew substantially in 2025, but that is much less than our overall. And so I think as we look ahead 3 or 4 years, I think that transition will still be happening, but it's going to be a lot more mature. I'd like to see us at least in the hundreds of thousands of subscribers, if not approaching 1 million. I think that is still there's still a huge amount of opportunity in the industry at that point. And at the same time, like, we're still very early stage, right? You're talking, there may be 50 publications or media companies in the world that have 100,000 premium subscribers or more. So like, this is still very, very early days. And so I'd like to think that, 3 years from now, we're one of the leading companies doing this, that we're doing it across 18 publications. And, like I said, we're in the hundreds of thousands of subscribers, approaching 1 million. That translates to something on the order of 50 million in revenue and higher. So if you're really approaching 1 million subscribers, I think 1 million subscribers, you're probably doing at least 100 million in revenue. So that's the sort of scale that we would hope to be able to achieve in kind of an upside scenario.
And growth strategy wise, is this just a large paid acquisition strategy of going after acquiring new paid subscribers? Or is this a go and acquire other brands and then scale them up through your readership, a combination of both? How do you go about that?
It's absolutely a combination of both. So, we are building internally a skill set around how do we grow both organically and through paid an audience to an individual title. Now, of course, each individual title will have some maximum point of audience saturation, right? Like the 120 million people that we're talking about, maybe only 2 million are interested in this particular thing, and not all of them are nearly subscribed at any given moment, right? So on the one hand, we're trying to build sort of the in-house skill set to be able to grow each title to sort of its full audience potential. So that it attains a leading position in the niche that it's in. And at the same time, then we want to be able to stamp about like Maytags, right? So we want to be able to then grow inorganically through acquisition as well, so that we're stacking niches sort of next to each other. And then within each of those niches, we're growing that individual title.
This is a tough business. Building a media company is not easy. And it looks as though you've been at this for a while. I'm just curious to hear from you. What's your why? What gets you up in the morning? Why are you fighting this fight to build this company?
Well, I'm absolutely a missionary founder. I'm sure that you've talked on the pod before about missionaries, mercenaries, and visionaries. And you want the visionaries, and I'm afraid I'm a missionary. I come from a long line of journalists personally. Like all the way back to the founding of the Associated Press, which my great grandfather and granduncle were involved in, and I grew up in a newspaper family. Like my father, my grandfather, my aunt, my cousins, they all are journalists. All run newspapers. This was a dinner table conversation when I was a kid. And then, of course, obviously, in an adolescent way, I did everything I could to do something else, anything else, for a little while. And then one day I said, well, I guess I should give it a try. And so I became a reporter, and I discovered that I really liked being a reporter. And at the same time, the traditional news business was being disrupted by the internet. And I recognized that we had a business model problem. And I think that journalism, when it's done poorly, makes the world a better place. Even when it's done poorly, it makes the world a better place. And so what gets me up every morning is the idea that, like, what would the world be like if journalism was done well? And I think the biggest obstacle, there's a lot of shitty journalists out there. Obviously, there's a lot of people who are attracted to journalism, to writing for news organizations for the wrong reasons, right? Like, sure, that happens, but there's also a lot of really talented, really great journalists who are just interested in uncovering the truth. And the main reason they don't get to do that very well is because there isn't a business model that enables them to do that. And so, like, what gets me up every morning is the idea of, we think we figured out what the business model is that is going to be A, a great business, B, great for journalism, and C, therefore, great for society.
I'll give you the last word here. For those investors who are on the line or thinking about it, but they're not there yet, what do you want them to know?
People are attracted to what we do because they see that great journalism is great for society. And that always in itself creates a skepticism. If it's good for the world, then it can't also be a good business. And I think this is an instance, what I want people to understand is this is an instance where the two things are one and the same. A great business model yields great journalism, and great journalism in this day and age, in the age of AI slop, which we think has created a race to the top, in an age when we're all sick and tired of advertising, when we all have said, because of Netflix and Patreon and everything else that's happened, we've said we're willing to pay for news. That opportunity to build that business model is there. And so, I think we really do have the opportunity here, somewhat uniquely, right? I don't think it comes along all the time, but we really do have the opportunity here where we can do well by doing good, and we can do good by doing well.
If you want to learn more about why Fragment Media scored a 4.5 out of 5 on the Kingscrowd proprietary rating scale, you can go to kingscrowd.com and search Fragment Media. And as always, if you like what you heard on the show today, please like, subscribe, and share our podcast wherever you listen so more investors like you can find us.